now tuned in to the Dervich Commercial Real Estate Podcast.
This is an opportunity you have at one of your centers. Right. It's excess land that's being underutilized, and you're looking to add value. In your opinion, right?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like when you look at it, people are like,
Hello, this is JEFF-DERVECH with DEVERCH Real Estate here. I appreciate you listening in with us. Today we have a great show. We will be discussing commercial property management, specifically based around shopping centers and retail strip center plazas. We're going to talk about ways to efficiently and effectively run a retail property, from the collection of rents to budgeting for expenses and capital expenditures, as well as discussing protocols for hurricane preparation and execution. Our guest today is Dimitrios Langas with RPM Realty Management. RPM Realty Management is a full-service commercial real estate property management firm with over 30 shopping centers under management, encompassing over 1.3 million square feet throughout the state of Florida. Dimitrios comes with over 19 years of commercial real estate experience, working for Marcus and Millichap, Cushman Wakefield, formerly DTZ, and now RPM Realty Management, where he is managing partner of the firm. Dimitrios, thank you for being here with us.
Jeff, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure. Dimitrios, if you will, please share with us how your firm handles boarding a new client, shopping center owner, and what's the standard process that you have for giving property updates, as well as discussing with them financial reporting and things of that nature.
Yeah, thanks again, Jeff. And that's a great question to start this podcast with, because a lot of it starts from onboarding, and oftentimes in the property management business, you're brought into the process late. You're brought into it after an acquisition has occurred, and it would be great if we could be there from the beginning, which would prevent a host of problems. And I think we talked off air a little bit about that, and I'll just get into that first. If anyone's out there thinking of buying a shopping center, get your managers involved early. Make sure they're abstracting all the leases. And the reason being for that, we have a lot of great investment sales brokers in the community. They do a fantastic job, but their job isn't managing a shopping center. Their job is to transact and move on to the next deal. And the investor, you, or the management company, us, is left dealing with the aftermath that continues for the life cycle of the property. One of the biggest issues we come across that we try to prevent when onboarding for a new client is, the CAM reconciliation. Where is it in the year? And if you're buying a shopping center in the middle of the year, and you're looking to close in October, from January to October, there's going to be monies that are either owed to the landlord or owed to the tenants once everything's reconciled. Be sure in the purchase and sales agreement, whose responsibility is it to collect that money? Is it going to be the previous owner, or is it going to be the new owner? And make sure it's detailed in there, because that's always a point of frustration. Because the new management company, the new owner, is not going to be a collector for the old owner. And the old owner may feel that he's owed that money if the tenants had underpaid. So not to get too much off topic, but I think that's real important for people to think about out there. But when you're on board a new property, the first thing we got to do is take a look at every single lease and abstract it. So we have a very firm handle on how the CAM operates in the property. Leases are living documents, so
I totally agree.
You've done plenty of leases yourself. You're negotiating on whosever behalf you're representing, right? So could be certain leases that the CAM is negotiated completely different from one tenant to the next. So most importantly, you want to have a good understanding of how the expenses for each tenant work. You want to abstract those leases right away. You want to make sure who's paying how much of CAM, what you can charge. Sometimes you're allowed to charge an administrative fee. Oftentimes in CAM, you're able to bill back the management fee. But again, these things are negotiated in and out of leases all the time. So you just have to be very particular when onboarding a property to know how to do the billing. And then as far as onboarding on the property side, we make sure that we're contacting all the vendors right away. We're making sure that it's best pricing available. I mean, it's very easy for us to compare with what our vendors are doing in our portfolio, so we'll know whether or not they're doing a good job. Oftentimes it's the same people. And ultimately, when you're taking on new property, you don't want to disrupt too much. You want to leave things as they are, just have an understanding of it, and then start adjusting things slowly. Yeah, you don't want to rock the boat too much.
What type of vendors would you say, that you would look at in a shopping center that you would compare across the board?
So, oftentimes, we love our properties looking best in class, so we got to make sure that the portering is up to service. We want to make sure that the landscaping is looking to be top of class. We have enough competition out there. You want people coming to your center. You don't want it looking tired. And then, for any other type of vendor, whether we're happy with the HVAC company that they've been using and all that sort of stuff.
Sure.
So it becomes a case-by-case basis. So you take all that in, you've notified all your tenants. So in essence, you've onboarded your property, depending on what software the ownership wants to use, whether it's Yardi, whether you onboard it onto Yardi and have the property operating from there.
Absolutely. Do you run into any issues when you do come into a new property? Like you mentioned that the boat does get rocked a little bit and things of that nature. What kind of has been your experience with that?
Yeah, good question. The biggest, the funnest part is when
because your client is the property owner.
Exactly.
Property owner just purchased the property.
Yeah.
You're serving his best interest.
Exactly. We're representing the landlord. And by representing the landlord, though, we need to have a very good relationship with the tenant. It's not adversarial. It's not one side. We need happy tenants to have a good operating property. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. It's symbiotic.
Sure.
However, the biggest problems that we have, like I said, we go through every single lease and we re-abstract everything, and we're going to do our budget going forward the way we find fit in the lease. We'll pick up a lot of expenses that aren't being charged. A lot of other operators or management companies, they're just not very diligent about how much they can collect. Oftentimes what that's going to do is you're going to have a much higher CAM expense going forward. So when you're billing the tenants, what they should have been being billed, you're, first of all, from the landlord side, you're capturing upside that wasn't there. So you're creating value, right? But what that does in turn, it's a fine balancing act, because now you're charging the tenants some extra expense that they weren't paying previously that they should have been paying.
Sure.
Oftentimes, you have to raise the CAM quite a bit, just because people become very complacent. They're not looking through the documents to see what you can and cannot be charging for. So that can be a big number. And for a small shop space, if it's a mom and pop, if you ding them, an extra $5-6 grand for the year, might be the difference for them being able to keep their door open or not.
Absolutely.
So again, it's a fine balancing act, and it becomes a business decision at that point.
Sure.
As far as how much you want to, collect and charge. Best thing is just as you're rewriting your leases, just do it the way it should be done up front from the beginning. so they know what they're getting involved with, and there's no surprises.
Absolutely. So, I mean, just traditionally speaking, with a shopping center, you have operating expenses, you have annual expenses. What are some of the standard annual property expenses that a retail shopping center incurs? You know, there's property taxes, insurance, there's CAM, which you've already mentioned, which stands for Common Area Maintenance, and I'd like you to kind of explain what that is. And then how do you count and project out for these expenses as a property management company?
Yeah, so you're going to have your regular occurring expenses in a shopping center. You have the real estate taxes, you have the insurance, and then you have your CAM, which are your main three components of a triple net lease. The CAM gets further broken down into other expenses that are for the common areas of the property, and all the tenants share in that expense. Typical CAM expenses include, utilities for lights in the common areas. There's trash removal. There's parking lot maintenance. You have some repairs and maintenance that goes in there. There's pest control, landscaping, things of that nature. That all falls under CAM. And what ends up happening with your CAM, you budget the best you can for it, and then at the end of the year, you reconcile, you see how close you came to budget, and that's when you have to go back and you either have to, you're either adjusted up or you're adjusted down. You're either paying back money to the tenants, or they owe a little bit more.
Sure.
And and oftentimes a management company comes into the picture when there's a sale.
Right.
This is a deeper issue in I think in real estate that somehow will be dealt with, or you're starting to see a lot of tenants pick up on it. But when there's a big sale, say someone sold out to a property, for 15 years and they bought it for $6 million or something, 5-6 million, and they're selling it today for $16 million, whatever, pick a number, but there's a big increase in price.
Of course.
Oftentimes, people are buying things below market, whatever they're doing, but there's a big increase in price.
So you're saying a shopping center that someone owns for a long period of time, and they might have bought it, 20 years ago, and is worth $6 million, and things have changed, rents have gone up, and the new property price transacts at a $16 million figure. Sure.
Okay. Yeah. That's a $10 million difference there. There's going to be a much heftier tax bill coming that year. So you're going to have to bill that back to the tenants, or the tenants' new charges are going to be much higher taxes for the year going forward. Excuse me. So that's going to be a shock to them. You're starting to see a lot of retailers.
To that point, I understand and can feel that, and I've seen that in leases where, Starbucks, for instance, I know in their leases in shopping centers and things of that nature, and if they're going into a new space, they cap how many times a sale can occur within a certain period of time, because if a developer builds a multi-tenant strip center and puts in 3 new tenants, and then they sell that as an investment property, 6 months later, that sells, and then maybe, there's some value increase, there's some value added in that, and the next owner sells it within a 2-year period or something like that. Next thing you know, the property just traded 3 times based off of the existing leases that are within the center, off of the tenant's credit. And so the tenant's the one that's getting hit back with the
increase in taxes,
increase in property taxes because of the sale of the property. So
the developer could have bought that land for $2 million. If you have 5, 6, 7 tenants, they're selling at a 6.5 cap. All of a sudden, you have a $7-8 million property. You're going to have a much higher tax bill. So
now, traditionally speaking, if it's new construction, it's formulated differently on the property tax side with the property tax appraiser, whatever municipality you're in. Sure. And then from there, if it's existing building, they have annual caps, so it won't. If you build a building and tenants and whatnot, and it's $3 million, and then you flip it and sell it because you created value within that space, and you sell it for $6 million within a year period, there are some limitations on how fast that step up in property taxes do occur, depending upon each municipality.
We see it between a year to a year and a half typically, but it's going to come. You're
Sure.
going to pay that higher tax.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of tenants are represented well. You know, there's a lot of brokers out there, or tenants are very, hip to the game. They'll put a cap in their real estate, how much you can charge them in real estate taxes. So, they're capped at where it is when they sign the lease, or how much, or they're not responsible if the property trades for an increase. And so you're starting to see that with the corporate tenants, not so much with the mom and pops and the local operators.
So we have property taxes, we have insurance that we've discussed.
Correct. And then the CAM charge. So
Hold on the insurance side, let me ask you. So say you have a shopping center and it's not in a flood zone.
Yep.
And you have all the traditional insurances that are associated with, commercial property and the size of it and things of that nature. But you want to put flood insurance on the property because you own the asset. You know what I mean? And you want to protect it. So, over here in South Tampa, like it's not. You don't have to have flood insurance in some of these just because of the location of the zone, but you want to add it to best protect the structure and the property. Is that something that can be passed on to the property to the tenants in the CAM, or?
That's a tricky question. That might be beyond my. I've never dealt with that.
Yeah.
So, but I could see a number of things arising from that. It's going to be very expensive.
Yeah.
So, if you want to do it as a landlord and pay for it out of your pocket, out of your net income, no one's going to stop you from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want to be putting extra insurance just because you're worried of a flood zone or a flood, there could be lease language in there that leases clearly state what insurance you're allowed to have on there or what needs. Anything extra, you're going to have a hard time passing on
Sure.
to the tenant. But no one's going to prevent you as an owner from doing that and paying for it out of pocket.
Right. I just never knew the question of that answer. So it's a unique situation. I think everything's looked at in a case by case scenario.
I mean, in the insurance, in the lease section, in the taxes, and in the insurance section, it's very specific what insurance you can charge the tenant for the limits and all that sort of stuff. So the tenant, anyone that would look at their lease, if you were to put it in and say, I'm going to put flood insurance, if I'm the tenant, I'd say, well, are we in a flood zone? No. Well, I'm not going to be charged for insurance we don't need. So you would run across that.
And on the expense side, accounting for it, you have programs and whatnot, but everything throughout the CAM that because there's the property taxes, there's the insurance. Those are two big bulk items, and then you have the CAM, which is a bulk item. But underneath that, you have a bunch of different details of what makes up that CAM.
Yeah.
How do you look at those expenses? And a lot of times, it's looked at on a price per square foot basis. Can you get into the analysis of why that's looked at on a price per square foot basis?
Well, we want to make sure we're within market. You want to be competitive as an owner. You don't want to be putting yourself in a position where your CAM has gotten so high where your tenants will just go somewhere else that the CAM is lower. So you want the property to remain competitive, and you want to make sure that your pricing is correct. Sometimes if something's too low too, that might not be good either. Maybe you're not getting the right amount of service.
Sure.
So it all plays a role.
Absolutely. So those are the expense sides of the shopping center. So when you have a shopping center owner, typically I'd imagine before the end of the fiscal year, you guys will get together and discuss the next year coming forward. And how do you look at preparing and budgeting for capital expenditures that potentially might be needed in the future? What's the methodology around that, and what formulas do you use to say, well, we need to start saving for a new roof, we need to start saving for paving, and we need to look at, we want to do a facade and increase LED lighting and stuff like that. How do you prepare for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're preparing your budget for the year moving forward, which you should be, you can start preparing your budgets depending on how many properties you have, but you can even start in the middle of the year. So
when do you typically start with these guys?
We start in July, end of June and July, And
so this is busy season for you right now.
This is starting to get busy. We used to do it in the last quarter, but when you're doing budgets and CAM reconciliations, there's a big crunch right there. And as the company's growing, you want to have enough leeway where you're not getting pressed too much. But the income side of the budget's easy.
Sure.
You know what the leases are. You know what the increases are. You can put them in there. If there's any vacancies, you can update that. The accountants can update that.
As long as they're paying rent, right?
Yeah, that's the most important part, right? Well, they can pay rent so long as the check clears.
Exactly.
But anyhow, so the income side of the budget, you can do it whenever you want. You know who your tenants are. You know what they're paying. You know what the increases are going to be. If you get any leases towards the end of the year, you just fill it in. The expense side can be a little trickier because there's some variable, uncontrollable expenses, whether it's repairs and maintenance and different things.
Right, plumbing issues that come up.
Exactly. But at least you can start the base of your budget, get the income side done, start it in the middle of the year if you like, or towards the last quarter. And then you start, by the last quarter, you have a good feeling of what for the previous 3 quarters what the expenses are. So you can start forecasting from there. You can forecast another quarter what the expenses are going to be. So you take that number and then going forward, whether you want to use that year-end number or inflate it a little bit, that becomes a business decision moving forward for preparing the budget moving forward. But typically you're not going to see too much. I know a lot of programs like to increase everything 3%, and that may or may not be the case, but that's how you start formulating your budgets. And then as far as capital expenditures, we'll get with our property managers, and as we start completing the budgets, we'll start asking them what's needed here.
Start assessing the property.
When was the last time it was painted? When was the last time the parking lot might need resurfacing and restriping? And we start staggering these items out. And depending on the ownership, we just had a property where actually we'll escrow money every month to build up an escrow amount if we need to do a new parking lot. It becomes client specific. Some institutional clients, they have enough money in the bank, you can just pay it one time, whatever the capital expenditure is, and it's done with. Other times, if it's a private investor and they're using the cash flow, you'll want to make sure you allow enough time so it doesn't affect the cash flow too much, where you're escrowing a small amount for that capital expenditure at the end of the year.
Sure, and I guess the longer you've owned a center, the longer you own a strip center, shopping center, you understand, what needs to be done and can project out the future easier if you're accounting for it. But if you just buy a property and you look at it, you're like, oh, we need a new roof in 2 years, it's going to come when it comes. So you're going to have the money to put it together.
I mean, you got to really do your due diligence on the front end and know what's coming and make sure you're capitalized. If you do need a new roof in 2 years, a new roof can run you anywhere from $7 to $12 a foot, depending on the quality. It can be costly. So you want to make sure you have enough money in reserve. Whether you're putting partnerships together, however you're buying your properties, make sure you allot for that. You account for that. If you guys know you're going to need a new roof or you're going to need to do the parking lot in the next year,
maybe don't take as much cash out of the
whatever works.
Let me ask, just traditionally speaking, with all things being equal, how much money should someone put into a reserve account to bring forth to the next year? From a rule of thumb, I've always been kind of going along the basis of 2 months worth of rent. What do you guys think?
I mean, we absolute minimum a debt service payment.
Yeah.
Whatever that can be, absolute minimum. 2 even better.
Okay.
But you want to make sure that debt service is paid. I mean, 95% of these properties are financed.
Sure.
And you want to make sure that payment is going to be on time, and there's enough cash in there. So that's what we advise our clients. But oftentimes, are there's plenty of, well, you want to capitalize enough so you're not going back to your investors or asking for more money or anything like that.
Sure.
But I would say, for a rule of thumb, bare minimum,
What does the bank require? Typically,
that all becomes very specific to each deal. So depending whether it's a CMBS lender or a life insurance company, and the age and the quality of the property, and the type of tenancy you have. If you have a Winn-Dixie with 5 years left or something, the bank might, maybe Winn-Dixie is not the best example, but if you have a bigger box, kind of a junior box, and that lease is coming due, in 4 or 5 years, the bank's going to want to escrow. How much is that lease and commission going to cost to fill in a 25,000 square foot junior anchor? How much are the TIs going to be? Without, doing too many calculations, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. It could be $200,000-$300,000, whatever the number is, right? The bank, when they're lending you the money to purchase the property, they're going to hold this in escrow right from the start. So they're going to have their own escrow account, so that's how that's dealt with.
Gotcha.
No.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate you shedding some light on that.
Yeah, no problem.
What we live in Florida, and we are known for our hurricanes.
Yeah.
They come up through the south, and a lot of times, as of recently, we've been pretty fortunate here in the Tampa MSA and along the west coast of Florida. We had Hurricane Irma last year that did damage to some areas worse than others.
Yeah.
But as a property management firm, what are your protocols for handling hurricanes, as well as preparation and execution?
Yeah. Well, knock on wood, we were safe from Irma, and we have properties throughout the state of Florida. First and foremost, there needs to be communication with the tenants right away. They need to know who the emergency contact numbers are, who they're going to be speaking with, and who the emergency contact numbers. What we came across too, it's very tricky. Tenants don't realize, a lot of tenants, the corporates, they get it, but the plate glass on the storefront, that's not the landlord's responsibility when you've rented out a space. That falls on the tenant. So it's really, if it's leased up, it's their responsibility to board up their storefront. Something should happen, it becomes very complicated then. Was it a hurricane? Yes, it was. Their insurance comes into play, but if it wasn't a hurricane and something, it can fall on the tenant. So they need to understand what their responsibility is, not just the landlord's. Obviously, if it's a bad enough storm, or if you're in the path, you're going to be doing as much as you can to protect your property. Obviously, the vacancies are your responsibility. You want to make sure everything is tied down. You want to make sure we make sure we're contacting our vendors, that they're on queue for us. Make sure they service our properties first, because don't forget, during Irma, with so many landscapers, that was the biggest issue we had, was all the debris, the landscaping debris. A lot of the landscapers throughout the state of Florida had left to go to South Florida and different areas that were damaged for work, to get, and they were making good money doing that. But that's when your relationships come into play, and that's when it's very important to have good relationships with your vendors, and make sure that they're there for you too afterwards for the cleanup. And then we're making sure we have our own internal protocols that we're sending them, emails, constant contact with them,
sure.
and mobile phone numbers, so everyone's they know there's someone there.
Let's just be honest. There's only so much you can do.
Exactly.
You can prepare as best that you want to prepare, but if you have a storm, and that's number one, is preparation. You have to have good preparation in those when you have a natural disaster that you can foresee coming. That's number one, preparation. And talking with you, about the way that you send out the emergency contacts and all that, it's very, that's great. And the concept of the windows, that's the first time I've kind of really put some thought into that.
That's something you're thinking about.
Yeah.
It's it can get very tricky, and everyone's very, emotions are running high. Everyone, the storm's to blame, right? But there's also responsibility.
You prepare, you hope for the best. I mean, these storms come through. You can board up the windows. You can strap down everything you possibly can. But there comes a point in time where you got to seek shelter yourself.
Exactly. You got to protect your family first, right?
Yeah.
So,
and so you got to protect shelter yourself, and you got to be safe. And then you come back to the asset as soon as you can to evaluate any potential any potential things that might have gone wrong there, flooding and plumbing issues and electrical wires being down, and really at that point there's only so much that you can do at that point as well, because like you said, all the vendors you have to get the vendors out there, and they as well have to keep safe. So it's a process. It's a timely process after disaster, but like you said, all you can do is prepare for the best.
Absolutely. And then luckily, we stay out of the path of trouble. It's
fortunate.
No.
So let's talk. In a shopping center, you have a lot of tenants that in their leases, per their leases, they report sales. Some don't, some do.
Yeah.
How do you handle reporting of sales with retailers to owners? Can you walk us through that process?
So it's very lease driven, the reporting of sales. They either report or they don't, and it's very clear in the lease who has to report. The ones that do report, and if there's any type of if there's any break points or anything that we're tracking all that, and whether it's quarterly, we're sending the reports, whatever. It's all driven by the lease. So we'll keep track of the sales. We'll see how they're doing, and tracking all that for the landlords. Where you get into the situation of a rent reduction, or you're trying to renew a tenant and they're asking for lower rent, or their business isn't so good, well, that's when we'll say, hey, let's take a look at your sales, provide your last 3 years, and let's see where the problem is. Is there really a problem? And oftentimes, there'll be a little drop in sales and whatnot. But as far as handling the sales, that's one thing that's most important. Is if a struggling tenant's coming at you and asking you, for rent reductions, or they can't pay their increases and it's not in their lease, that's a time when you can request it from them. And more times than not, they'll provide it.
Sure. Interesting. In a center, a lot of times you have, depending upon the structure of the lease, again, the AC units and whatnot. I want to talk to you about AC. Mm-hmm. How do you typically handle the servicing of AC units? Do you prefer for the services to be scheduled by the landlord or tenant? I mean, in triple net leases, the AC unit is the responsibility of the tenant.
You would think so most of the time, right? Most of the time,
right?
And that's what we prefer. I mean, you're operating your business in there. You're using the space. It's a lot that typically falls on the tenant. Oftentimes, when you're buying a shopping center, you're going to inherit old leases. So you're going to inherit what's in those leases. Sometimes it might be silent and nothing was put in there. You kind of have to work with that and see what was going on. Oftentimes, it's the tenant's responsibility, or again, a lease being a living document, a negotiated document, might be the landlord's responsibility. Just because it's a triple net lease, again, these things all have their nuances. But generally speaking, and certainly in our leases, the HVAC falls under the responsibility of the tenant. What we will do, however, is I hope we don't get too many requests, but I don't want to give out too much. But what we will do to help out the tenants, and we don't want them getting into a scary proposition. We'll guarantee that it's operating for the first year or two. That it's operating. We'll guarantee it for the first 2 years, year, whatever it is, and that helps, right? And
depending on the term of the lease.
Typically a 5-year lease or whatnot. And then after that time, it's the tenant's responsibility. The way we draft our leases, is they have to have a maintenance contract with a licensed HVAC contractor. Make sure they come in to check it, change the filters. Whether that's done, twice a year, 4 times a year, depends on the type of business and how much time. But we would typically, in our leases, the way we generally have it, our standard is we have to approve of the HVAC contractor. We got to make sure there's a commercial vendor, they know what they're doing.
Sure.
And that, and it's the tenant's responsibility to have them serviced. So.
Yeah, no, I almost feel as if in those situations, if you're a landlord, you want to say, listen, you have to service your AC, you have to change the filters monthly, if and you service biannually, something like that.
That's fine.
If that's reasonable. But I would prefer to pick the contractor, to have the contractor with me as the landlord, and then charge it to the tenant, just so that I can make sure that the AC unit that technically is the property of the landlord is being serviced properly, and that there's not an issue with that. Have you ever run into that?
I mean, you run into the situation who's choosing what and who's going to do what. If you want to have it as the responsibility of the tenant, they're going to choose their own HVAC contractor. I mean, you could have it in your lease that you have to approve them. So it's not just a guy in a truck.
Sure,
it's a good company, And no disrespect to a guy in a truck, but you need to have quick response time.
Well, also to that effect, I mean, you got to make sure that they're qualified as well. You get these guys that go up on the roof and start puncturing holes into the roof, and then you have a roof issue.
There you go. And that all gets into a whole other issue with shopping centers when there's leaks. Whether is it a roof issue, is an HVAC issue? So in any event, to get back to your question, typically, the tenant has to have the contract, the maintenance contract, and we'll just approve of the vendor.
Who has ownership? So let me ask. So you have a 5-year lease, right?
Mm-hmm.
The tenant's been there for 4 years. At the beginning of year 4, it's the tenant's responsibility to replace the AC unit. Year 4, the AC unit goes.
Yeah.
They put a new AC unit in.
Okay.
Is that just their expense? I mean, the AC unit's the ownership of the property owner.
Not necessarily. I mean, when you sign a leasehold interest in a property, you own the lease, right? You're leasing that space, so that becomes your property at that point. So during that duration.
So the tenant at year 4, 5-year lease, year 4, they need a new AC unit. They put a new AC unit in.
Yeah.
The end of their term comes at the end of year 5.
You have to leave what was there in the same or better condition.
Okay, that's where I was getting at.
Yeah. All these things have been thought of before. Before us and after us. They're, and oftentimes, look, during a renewal, a lot of times a tenant will ask, hey, the AC is getting a little old. We want to renew. We'll do a 5-year lease. Change out my AC. It's usually the way it goes.
Sure.
It's unfortunate if it does fall on just the tenant and they have to bear the cost of themselves.
Absolutely. So in shopping centers and in strip center plazas, more so in strip centers, many of the owners, have gross leases. Some of them have triple net leases. How many of your owners prefer to have gross leases and pay the expenses as opposed to net leases where they charge the tenant base rent plus CAM?
None. I mean, no disrespect, but if they don't know what they're doing, right, they would have a gross lease, or if they don't have much of an accountant background. Gross leases makes life a lot easier. As you get into more sophisticated properties, anchored properties, and you're dealing with corporate tenants, you're going to have the standard triple net lease in place. But from an owner standpoint, look, you want to offset some of your expenses. That there's business. Sometimes you have businesses they're doing $2, $3, $4, $5 million in gross sales out of your real estate. I mean, they're making a lot of money. Not everything is not a sad story. There's plenty of successful retailers, so they should share in their expenses in their portion of the expenses in the property they're operating that they're using.
Yeah.
They're making plenty of, they're making good money, their business is successful. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. So certainly you want to convert. And what we will do is any gross leases that we inherit, we with every renewal, we'll convert them over to a triple net, which in turn creates more value for the landlord too.
Absolutely. In your industry, I mean, the only constant is change, and in this commercial real estate environment, technology is evolving.
Yeah.
What changes are you seeing on the technology front as it relates to property management, reporting, efficiencies, things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, everything's just, becoming more mobile. Everything's much more accessible, which is great, from a property management standpoint too. We can connect our vendors to our own system, and, we can check off if things are completed or not. Then, our accounts payable knows it's okay to pay the invoice. I mean, there's just, and in a way too, there's also so much out there too, where you kind of have to go through the weeds and figure out, is this easier with the technology or without it? I mean, there needs to be some type of technology there. Sometimes it can be overwhelming with everyone's got a new product they're pitching.
Right.
So you need to differentiate what's really going to add the most value to your business, or am I just adding something on top of something I already have? So you just got to be careful with that sort of stuff.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they have, has it gotten to the point now where the owners can check on their phone real time what the P&L is and all that stuff?
Absolutely. If they want access to whether it's on Yardi or and they want to have their own login and they can take a look, absolutely. It's all accessible. But real estate's one of the last industries to be disruptive. I mean, I see a lot of things in my business that I would love to change with technology. But that's for another conversation on another podcast.
I hear you.
Maybe dealing with the blockchain. But,
that's a whole separate thing.
There's a lot of stuff that's still very stodgy, still very just slow. That could really be revamped. I think it will be in the coming, whether it's 10, 20 years. But
how many of your tenants pay via wire transfer versus a traditional check?
I mean, we try to move as many as we can over to ACH. And if I had to put a number on it, it's not the majority, I could tell you that. I wish it was.
Who bears that expense on the ACH transfer charge or fee?
Yeah, that's whether the tenant, I think, picks up I think they pick it up on their own end, but
so if you got a small tenant that's paying $1,500, a $25 monthly HCH fee adds up over the course of a year,
Yeah, and oftentimes the smaller tenants, they'll just send a check, and so there's still paper involved.
So that's when you're saying checks. Hopefully it clears.
Yeah, exactly.
In communities where we live, shopping centers are such a large part of the community. What do you see shopping centers doing, and what can shopping center owners do to create engagement with the local community and boost foot traffic at shopping centers? I've been following and reading a lot of articles on different owners, what they're doing, because ultimately the more people you have and more foot traffic you have at your centers, the higher the retail sales are, which in turn make happy retailers. I've seen pop-up food trucks. I've seen them holding concerts in the parking lots on the weekends. Doggy day derbies on Saturdays where people come out and say, "Hey, come on out. We'll bring your dog. We're gonna have the parking lot, and we're gonna have a little dog park thing and stuff like that." What have you seen on some of your centers? Anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's there's all that going on, especially if it's a larger property. A lot of the shopping centers, though, that's quick service in and out, people come and go. I mean, maybe not exactly to your point, though, but, as far as bringing traffic to vacant centers, we'll try to do open houses. What we'll do is to bring foot traffic, we'll do openings. We just had Earl of Sandwich open a few months back on Dale Mabry. Business Bureau was there, and tried to get some local press there,
ribbon cutting and whatnot.
A little ribbon cutting, so all that sort of stuff helps us to get attention to it. Our properties really aren't the ones where we're going to be throwing concerts at. But it sounds like a good idea. Maybe we should try that.
Yeah.
But
I'll come.
Yeah, no, that sounds.
We'll bring the music too, yeah.
But I think Publix would have a problem with that if we tried to do anything in some of our shopping centers, or some of our tenants would
you don't
probably be pretty. Marshalls, I don't think, would be too happy with that. So I mean, it's. But again, all that stuff really, whether you want to do some advertising, social advertising, I think is the best way to approach that. Advertise your retailers. Showing what's going on, if there's any new retailer moving in, a new restaurant. I think it's incumbent upon the management company to really promote the businesses in the shopping center via social media, and that really helps getting the name out and helping the retailer.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Shopping center owners, they want it, like we just talked about, having community engagement and whatnot. They want shoppers to stay at their properties as long as possible.
Yeah.
Are you seeing strip center owners, shopping center owners paying attention to shopper retention times at their properties? What are these owners incorporating into their properties in order to increase this metric?
Absolutely, and we've been advising a lot of our owners, to have more open spaces in the restaurant space area, maybe create a little congregation area. There was this one shopping center in Temple Terrace we have, where there was a little area where you could make an outdoor seating, whether it's for a bar and just a congregating area. So our leasing director does a really good job. She's got great vision with that sort of stuff, and that's something that we're really pushing, because the food component of the shopping center is so important now, and that's going to drive a lot of traffic there. And so we're open to working with the with the operators to be able to make those types of spaces. Maybe you want to put a fountain somewhere if you have the space to do it, just where people can hang out, eat, and congregate.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, in today's day and age, the shopping center tenant composition is approximately 20 to 40% restaurant based. Now that's up approximately 10 to 15% from a decade ago.
Yeah.
So over time, and this goes back to the e-commerce environment and all that stuff, and creating an experience. But over the last decade, the push has been for restaurants and in centers, and that creates foot traffic and experience, and ultimately, like you said, longer customer retention times at the property. We have a one of my big mentors down in South Florida, Beth Azor.
Oh, absolutely.
Go
Fantastic.
Knowles.
Yeah.
She owns a couple properties, shopping centers down in South in Davie, and what she did is she made a substantial capital investment in putting benches, sitting benches all throughout her property, as well as putting music on the exterior of the walkways, and this was a very, very large investment, and she did it for a long-term investment in the property to ultimately increase, and this was an owner investment, increase shopper retention time for her tenants in order for them to participate in higher sales, for them to be happy.
Absolutely. And how happy are you going to be as a tenant if your landlord's doing that for you?
Sure.
You're not going anywhere. I mean, I'm going to pay more money to be with that landlord. I don't want to leave that place. That person cares about my business.
Right.
So yeah, that's she's done some amazing stuff, and I follow a lot of the stuff she does, and she's top number one when it comes to that sort of stuff.
Influencer.
Yeah, she's great.
Well, Dimitrios, it's always good seeing you, my friend. I appreciate you coming here. I appreciate your time today. We've had some great conversations, and it's always good to get together with a friend and a like-minded individual to discuss commercial real estate. We love it. We breathe it. We're in it every single day. So it's great seeing you and having you.
Absolutely. Likewise, the feeling is mutual, and let's do it again sometime.